Hopefully you can hear me okay. So you guys are the hardiest of the hardy, able to get out of bed first thing in the morning on Tuesday and make it here. And thank you for coming. So I'm Andrew Bolwell with HP, and I thought rather than tell you what I do, I'd instead share with you a few things I believe. And the first thing I believe is that a single individual or a small team can really change the world, do amazing things. And the second thing I believe is that to change the world or to make something happen or really just to do anything successfully, you've really got to believe you can. You've got to have a passion for what you do. So my passion is working on things that are either new to world or new to HP. That's what I'm lucky enough to do every day at work. And working on things that are new to world is also the general theme of what I'd like to talk with you about today. So sometimes I think that there's just so much change happening around us that we forget how fast things are changing. For example, the smartphones in our pockets now have more compute power than NASA had in 1969 to put the first man on the moon. And in fact, things are changing so fast that even just a few short years ago, who would have thought that Americans would spend $3 billion online on their largest online shopping day, Cyber Monday? An amazing amount of money. And yet a few days later in China, Chinese consumers would spend $14 billion on their largest shopping day, which they call their Singles Day. Or who would have believed that India would put a spacecraft around Mars for less than what Hollywood spent on making the movie Gravity? Or that the world's largest taxi company would own no cars? And looking ahead, we'll experience more change over the next 15 years than we've experienced in all of human history so far. And so I wonder what a Twitter feed of 2030 might look like. Maybe computers will become more intelligent than human beings. Maybe the medicines and drugs of the future, we'll be able to print them at home on a 3D printer. Or maybe we won't even need medicine and drugs in the future. Maybe we'll have devices embedded within us that allow the body to manufacture its own cures. So it's pretty clear that we can never really predict the future. We don't know what's going to happen. But I think understanding the megatrends that are happening around us and that are shaping the world around us can really help point the way. And so what do I mean by a megatrend? Well, I mean those global, socioeconomic, demographic, or technological forces that are going to have a sustained, transformative impact on how we live our lives in the future, impacting not just society, countries, economies, but our businesses and how we live our lives as individuals as well. And there's four that I'd like to share briefly with you today. Rapid urbanization, changing demographics, hyperglobalization, and accelerated innovation. And so just very briefly, just to step through these one at a time, rapid urbanization is all about the influx of people into cities. I mean, people are moving into cities in massive numbers because of the population and the population growth. By 2025, 5 billion people will live in cities, 2.5 billion of them in Asia. And as people move into cities, of course, our cities become larger. We'll have a lot more of them. And as people move into cities, they start earning more money and they start spending more money. So cities have a huge impact on the world economy. Because of urbanization, the world will welcome about 1.8 billion new consumers into the world economy by 2025. 95% of those in emerging markets. And those emerging market consumers will spend $30 trillion by 2030, up from $12 trillion in 2010. So a huge economic impact. But it's not just economic impact. People who live in cities are changing the business models. When you live in a dense urban area, many people no longer want to own things. They prefer to access things, and this is driving something I'm sure you've all heard of, the sharing economy. And people who live in busy cities also value their time more. So they want services to deliver everything from their groceries to the products they buy online and everything in between. So business models are changing because of urbanization as well. But it's not just that. Cities are also having a huge toll on our environment. If nothing changes by the year 2030, mankind will need the resources of 2 entire planets to sustain our current lifestyle. And population demographics are changing as well. I mean, quite simply, people are living longer and having fewer babies these days. And this is creating an aging population. By 2060, there'll be 3 billion more people over the age of 30 than there are today. And by 2030, we'll have twice as many people over the age of 65, nearly 1 billion. And of course, an aging population also means an aging workforce. And this is putting strain on governments and economies simply because there's not enough people working to support all the people retiring. In Italy, for example, by 2050, they'll have more people retired than are working. So you can imagine the impact this is having on social security, on healthcare costs, and on retirement age, to name just a few. But I also think there's a hidden opportunity here too. While we're all focused on the millennial, this aging, working population, the silver spenders as they are commonly known, have a lot more spending power than their younger counterparts, so could represent an untapped market for companies in the future. And hyperglobalization. Hyperglobalization is all about the world becoming smaller, becoming more interconnected. And we see the result of this being the emergence of digital platforms and ecosystems. That's why companies now are competing based on their platforms and ecosystems, no longer based on their products. And startups that are riding these digital platforms are able to scale at rates that have never been possible before. Market caps of $50 billion within 5 years if you look at Uber or Xiaomi or Airbnb. So the competitive landscape is also changing significantly because of hyperglobalization. And disruption is pretty much becoming the norm, not the exception. And it's happening to everyone, everywhere, even those companies that just a few short years ago were doing the disrupting themselves. And accelerated innovation. I mean, we're all being bombarded with faster, cheaper, more powerful technology. And sometimes it's easy to forget that this is because technology typically grows at an exponential rate. It changes at an exponential rate, not a linear rate. And this is why those same smartphones in your pocket that have more power than NASA had in 1969 won't just be 30 times more powerful in 30 years, they'll be 1 billion times more powerful. What will we do with all of that? So accelerated innovation also means that this change that we're feeling today, it's also just the norm. And if we think things are changing fast today, I think we haven't seen anything yet. It's just going to accelerate more and more into the future. And so what are some of these technology shifts that are being driven by this accelerated innovation or that are driving that? Well, hypermobility. The shift from devices that we carry to devices we wear to devices that will soon become part of us. Or the Internet of Things. We're all familiar with that term. As technology becomes smaller and more powerful, it's being embedded in the everyday devices and objects around us. Or smart machines. As those devices and objects become infused with machine learning, with artificial intelligence, they're becoming smarter and able to anticipate our needs. And when they grow wings and sprout legs and wheels and start roaming around in the physical world with us, well, we have drones, robots, and self-driving cars. and 3D transformation, which for me is all about the transformation of manufacturing, how we create physical objects and how we produce them in the future. But it's not all about more technology for technology's sake. I mean, technology really needs to help us live a better life, to be more productive, to be more creative, really just to spend more time with the people we love. And more, it's not so much about the technology, it's about the experience that we have with technology and what that enables for us. And at HP, we call that blended reality, the fusing of our physical and digital worlds in a way that does provide a better experience with the world around us. And maybe because today is a focus on the Internet of Things and mobility was so yesterday, I thought I'd just start with the Internet of Things. And I think it's pretty evident to everybody that one day soon everything will be online and connected. But I don't just mean devices or objects that include electronics. I mean every piece of paper, every object in the physical world, every 3D printed object, everything will have a digital service associated with it that we're able to activate with a wearable or a phone. So I like to think of this more as the Internet of all things. But it's really not all about connected devices. I mean, that's great. But where things really get fun is where everything becomes interconnected. Because it's only then that the use cases that this enables are going to spring up and span industries, span market segments, be able to follow us around and create an experience for us that we just not possible today. For example, arriving at work, the door knows who we are and just lets us in. Or if we're on a call, having that call automatically transfer from our phone to our desktop and patch us into a video call automatically without us having to do anything. Or on our way to a meeting and we're running late, so the participants automatically are told when we arrive and how far away we are. And when we get into the conference, our presentation being initiated automatically, not just to those in the room, but to those people who are remote as well, without us having to do a lot of work. And if the meeting's running late, people at home, our families, are automatically notified that we're running late and are told what time we'll be home. All of this should just happen around us without us having to think about it, without us having to work so hard at it. And if we think about smart machines, I'm sure many of you work in this area. I find it fascinating. You know, when I was growing up, and still to a large extent today, we told computers how to do things. What that meant is we programmed computers just to do things that humans could already do just better and faster. But there's a lot of things that today, as humans, we don't even know how we do. We don't know how we recognize faces, or that a cat is a cat or a dog is a dog. But we have a lot of data. We had a lot of images about cats and dogs and faces and other things. And so we're moving from a world where we programmed computers based on what we knew to actually enabling computers to learn from the huge amounts of data that's now available to us. And this is called machine learning. And this sort of struck me last year, I think. I remember seeing a video done by a company called DeepMind in the UK where they taught a computer how to play a game called Breakout. You guys are familiar with that game, maybe. It's you have a little bat and you hit a ball against some bricks, and when you hit the bricks, it wipes out the brick and you get a score. And so the way they programmed this was that they didn't tell the computer how to play the game. They didn't tell it the rules of the game. They just told it that the objective was to get the highest score possible. And so for the first 30 minutes, the bat just stood at the side of the screen, wasn't moving around at all. Obviously, he didn't score very well, wasn't a very good player. But it was learning. The bat would move randomly, hit the ball, and the computer would learn that that's how you got a score. In the next 30 minutes, it started playing a lot better. Started to move the bat around, started to hit the ball a lot more often. But still was just about the equivalent of a 9-year-old child. Another 30 seconds. The computer couldn't miss the ball. It was playing at a level that maybe the best human player could play at. But then what struck me was that in the next 30 minutes, it figured out that if it just hit the ball up the left-hand side at the right angle, it could break all the bricks up the left-hand side and then bounce up and down on the top of the screen and eliminate all of the bricks without having to use the bat at all. And it struck me that this computer was actually better at playing that game than any human being. More so, it was able to learn how to beat that game probably better than any human being. And you might say, well, that's very cool, but it's just a game. And yes, it's just a game. And yes, it's a very specific application. But then a few months later, artificial intelligence solved a problem that scientists haven't been able to solve for the last 100 years or so. Now, there's a certain type of worm, it's called a flatworm. It's able to regenerate its body parts. And scientists have been baffled for 100 years. How did it do this? Because if they could figure out how it did it, maybe they could figure out how we might regenerate human body parts. But over the last 100 years, they've been able to figure out the theory behind that. And so they gave that problem to an AI. And the AI figured it out in 42 hours, based on all the data that they'd collected. So it's not just games. It's creating theories that solve problems that our best human scientists haven't been able to solve themselves. And of course, we've seen these robots as well. We're moving from robots that work on a production line or that do things for us to robots that have emotional intelligence. They're able to read our expressions and faces and to figure out how we're feeling. And this robot, Pepper, in Japan, is an early stage robot like that. So if it notices you're feeling sad, I guess it tells you a joke. If you're looking confused, it might try and give you information. And this goes back to the aging population, because there are not enough people to look after the elderly, especially in Japan. It's a very super-aged country. And they're looking at how robots can provide that companionship. Now, I'm not sure where that's going to head, but you can definitely see the shift and the trends taking place. And finally, 3D transformation. I talked about this earlier. It's about how we produce physical products and manufacture those in the future. Everything from how we design them to how we produce them in our factories or even in our homes. And it wasn't that long ago, maybe 150 years, where we still had blacksmiths. Blacksmith's job was they were a master craftsman. Someone came to them and said, I need something, and the blacksmith would design it and build it and custom make it. But of course, that's not scalable. So what did we see happen? We saw designs move to blueprints. We saw manufacturing move to a production line, and that's pretty much how things still are. We've gotten better at designing and we've got better at manufacturing, but it's still a mass production model. But looking ahead, the design tools now are actually becoming easy to use, more natural and intuitive, enabling any one of us to design physical parts and products based purely on our imagination. And on the 3D printing side, we're also seeing some major advances in how we produce things and what we can do, moving from prototypes to final part manufacturing. And at HP, we've worked on this for a while. We've got a product called Multijet Fusion. You can actually change the color of the material at a molecular level, the surface properties at a molecular level. It can be see-through or it can be solid. Can be rubbery. It can produce or conduce electricity. And we're looking at even how we use different materials. And when you think about this, that gives us control over manufacturing that we've never had before. In the 2D world, we're all used to this concept called pixels, and you can change the color at a pixel level. In the 3D world, the equivalent's called a voxel, a volumetric pixel. And these new technologies coming out are allowing us to change the material of the products that we create in the physical world at that voxel level. And so when you pair that with these design tools that I mentioned earlier that democratize design, and you couple that with these 3D printing technologies that democratize manufacturing, You can produce products now that we've never been able to produce before, fully functional physical objects produced using just digital technologies. And so 3D printing, yeah, maybe all the rage, but there's already researchers and people in academia looking at something called 4D printing. So what is 4D printing? Well, quite simply, it's 3D printing, but it uses smart materials, which means after you've printed something or you've produced something, the shape of that something can change over time based on external stimulation or external triggers. So now imagine an aeroplane wing with a certain curvature, where that curvature can actually change over time based on atmospheric pressure, fuel efficiency requirements, and things like that. I was at TED last week, and there was a lot of focus on virtual reality. I got to see demos from obviously Microsoft and Meta and other companies where we could see objects, virtual objects in our physical world where it was really hard to tell the difference. What was real, what was virtual? But the one thing really missing is that you still can't really touch and feel them. And haptic holography is a technology that people are looking at that would allow us to not only see those virtual objects in the physical world, but to be able to touch them, to feel them, and to interact with them as well. And so we really are just at the beginning. I mean, as fast as things are changing and with all of the technology that we think is cool and leading edge, we really are at the beginning. And so how do we take advantage of all of this change that's happening around us? Well, I think we have to understand the megatrends shaping the world around us. We have to understand the technology shifts that are driving innovation forward. But more importantly, I think we have to understand the problems that we're trying to solve for people, the experiences that we're trying to create for people. But maybe more than any of those things, for me, I think it really comes down to attitude. Because innovating is being smart and able to recognize the right problem at the right time, but it's also having the right attitude to approach it, a belief that you can change the world. A belief that if you just keep trying, everything is possible. And a belief that everything really is possible. And it sort of brings me back to this, and I remember growing up, people would ask me, what do you want to be when you get older? What do you want to be when you grow up? And I'm sure you remember this question yourselves. I hope you remember what you answered when you were younger too. Because you know, as a kid, when you answer that question, you don't doubt that you can do that. You don't doubt that if you want to be a doctor or an engineer or a nurse or an astronaut, you don't go, but, oh, I'm too little, I'm too small, I can't do that. Of course, you believe you can. You have this childlike belief in what you can do. And I think as adults, we sometimes forget that. But then there's all of this technology around us. And I think the question really shifts from how we do something to what do we want to do with it all? What sort of world do we want to create? And for me, the coolest thing is that the future hasn't happened yet. We all get to create it. Everyone in this room gets to create what that future looks like. So I really do look forward to seeing what all of us do to create the most compelling future possible. Thank you very much.